I noticed that our youth do not have an inherent capacity to bounce back. So you fail in exams and your life is shattered. Your girlfriend leaves you and you want to commit suicide, and so forth and so forth. How do we build resilience in our youth to bounce back? Because obstacles will happen. Mothers and fathers will die. Wives will die. Girlfriends will go. Boyfriends will disappear. Institutions will collapse. The whole things will happen. COVID will happen. So how do you find a position for yourself? Go and find your true north. Be focused. Know where you want to go and be able to identify champions and mentors that can lead you along the way. It's very flattering. Every time I get a phone call or an email for a young person saying, I want you to mentor me, my first question is, why me? And the next one is, why not you? There is more and more question about how are you responding to demand of the community. So a university such as Tomboya University or Masai Mara University will only continue to exist as long as they're able to respond to the needs of the community. I was fortunate, Fiona, when I was in the board of the Commission of University Education with Professor Henry Fairo, to travel to the Netherlands and visit a university in the northern part of Netherlands. I can't quite remember the name. But the most interesting thing about that university is that it has relationship, especially the medical school. It has had a long relationship with the community, over 200 years long. And they have knowledge of the genetic constraints and problems of the community.
Welcome to another episode of Development Perspectives Africa. And our guest today is a second-time guest, Dr. JPR Odero, a very insightful top scientist in the world. And we shall be discussing about science, technology, innovation, and any other pertinent issues about research in Africa. Welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Fiona Umbali. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourselves.
My name is Ochieng Odero. Those are Luo names. Ochieng means that I was born at midday. Odero is my father's name, but it means that he was born during the time of harvest. The granary was full.
Wow.
So that's the meaning of my name. My initials are JPR. And yes, I've been in the research space, but also I've been involved in capacity strengthening, mentoring of youth, and shaping ideas and giving tips for proposal writing and resource mobilization. So it's a pleasure to once again meet you, Fiona, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
You have 36 years in the international development space. You have worked with various entities, top institutions in the world, and you have a vast experience in the field. Tell us, how did you start this journey? What inspired you to start whatever you started, and why?
An excellent question. I think, Fiona, if to describe myself well, I'm a product of excellent mentoring by research leaders and other people who have guided me along the way. In the year 1975, I was in fifth form at Nairobi School doing science courses, physics, chemistry, biology, very much wishing to join the University of Nairobi to do medicine. Given that my father was a practicing pharmacist, my mother herself was a nurse. So obviously my career was going to follow that trajectory. So we were invited as the class, the upper school class of Nairobi School, to attend a function at the Louis Likin Memorial Hall at the National Museums of Kenya, where a very interesting scientist known as Professor Thomas Risley Odhiambo, who's the founder of the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, or RICIPE for short, was giving a lecture, public lecture. And the title of the lecture was, "It is a Doo-Doo World." Now, Fiona, you must remember that Odhiambo was a foremost entomologist. And ISIPE itself was an institution that was focusing on insects. At the end of that lecture, I felt so motivated and inspired. And I said to myself, if I'm unable to follow a career in medicine, then I would like to be like this man. And I would like to work with him. How it was going to be, I don't know. I didn't get the grades to make it to the University of Nairobi. And so I joined the Medical Training Center, MTC, at Kenyatta National Hospital for a 2-year stint before getting a scholarship to go to Pune University in Maharashtra, India, to do my bachelor's course in zoology. When I came back in 1982, in fact, about 3-4 days before the attempted coup, I joined an interesting government organization known as the National Beekeeping Institute, located in Nairobi, at Ngong Road, just adjacent to Lenana School. Here I met the officer in charge, a gentleman who was known as Isaac Keria Kigatira. Kigatira, later Professor Kigatira, the late, was the pioneer scientist who was working on introducing and modernizing beekeeping in Kenya. I was fortunate to work under Professor Kigatira because at that time he was working on his thesis for University of Cambridge, for his PhD, on an aspect of honeybee, the African honeybee. For his master's at Guelph University, he had worked and developed the Kenya top bar hive, which was the first attempt to really move from the log frame hive that was hung on trees to just have a more modern hive. But Kigatira's topic for Cambridge for his PhD was answering two questions. The African bee, as you might know, swarms when the weather gets a bit extreme and it gets dry. And so the question that he was posing was, when the bees leave the hive, do they know where they are going? And secondly, do they know how far they fly? I was fortunate to work with Kigatira as this research scientist, as research assistant. And we traveled a lot all over this country during the research, but also doing extension, at that time funded by the Canadian government. Kigatira was successful in his quest for his PhD and answered those questions. Yes, the bees know where they're going, and they also know how they fly. If you look carefully at bees before they swarm, when they leave the hive, they make a wagging dance. Now, depending on the direction of the wag, that tells you the direction they'll fly. And depending on the intensity of that wag, will tell you how far they'll fly. But I was so motivated by Kigatira that I said, it is this type of answering African question and getting our responses that I would really like to do. Fortunately, 2 years after joining Kigatira, I won a scholarship by ISIPE to study the rearing of insects. And I spent my first year at the beta station, and then I went for my PhD in New Zealand. But you can see, almost immediately after my bachelor's, I now come back to work with Odhiambo at ISIPE. And so the mentoring continued. And so it has been. There, from there, later on, when I left ISIPE, I worked with another leading scientist, Professor Gilbert Kokwaro, who currently now heads health management at Strathmore University. But he was then the director of the Consortium of National Health Research, which was funded by three prominent funders, Wellcome Trust, IDRC of Canada, as well as the DFID of the UK. And in the consortium, we were able to work. I was the deputy director in charge of research under Kokwaro. We were able to give scholarships, build centers of excellence, and do a lot of training in health systems strengthening. So that is really my journey. And then, of course, I moved from then and I started working with the DFID and PricewaterhouseCoopers as a fund manager, and currently also now heading the Evidence Fund, which is an FCDO funded. So my journey has been, as I said, really direction or the trajectory has been because of the propulsion of the ideas and the mentoring of some very leading, excellent Kenyans. Thank you.
What a rich experience. Very splendid to learn about all these things you have done over the years. Now, you've spoken very well about bees and keeping bees. And of course, I've seen and had cases that species are at risk because of pesticides, climate change, and habitat loss. Could you speak briefly about that and why we need to think about keeping bees in our home states?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, I think you need to come from our cultural and our historical heritage as Africans, especially Kenyans. Most of the ethnic groups that we have in Kenya have had that long affiliation with bees, like honey gathering, keeping bees, the importance of honey in wedding ceremonies, honey as a source of treatment, preserving meat, and so forth. Honey has such a rich legacy all the way back to the time of the construction of the pyramids and the pharaohs. So honey is really a wonderful resource. But because of that, we have a great appreciation of honey and the importance of honey. And as you also know, the honeybee is one of the most important pollinators of our crops. So the point is that it is possible using modern beekeeping methods to have a business, an agricultural based entrepreneurial system that is based on bees, that farmers can integrate with other cropping ideas and livestock management that they have, and earn a living. But more importantly, and as you saw during COVID, one of the best treatments that we used during COVID was a concoction called dawa, which is a mixture of ginger and a few things, but honey was an important ingredient. And since COVID up to now, you can even see the price of honey has gone up. The quality of production of honey is high, and people are looking at other products from the hive, such as the wax, looking at the bee venom itself, which is extremely useful for arthritis, as well as the propolis for medicinal value. So there are several products that come from the hive. But the most important point is that the honeybee, well managed, is a part of an important ecosystem in preservation of our biodiversity. And it needs to be modernized and can give a return. But yes, there are threats to the industry because of diseases and pests. One of the most important pests of the honeybee is what is known as the varroa mite. And the varroa mite is extremely dangerous to the bees in the sense that it affects their well-being and introduces also diseases. Then there is the wax moth, which affects the wax, quality of the wax, and so forth. But even a very simple thing as the small sugar ant invading a hive turns the bees to become lethal, become aggravated. And I was taught by Gigatira many years back, a bee cannot sting anything which is smaller than itself. And so the bee does not really know what to do. And that's why occasionally you have situations where the bees go wild and even attack livestock and people. So they need to be managed. If managed well, you can live with them easily. There's the second threat, of course, you've mentioned is climate change. Climate change poses heavy impact on the big industry because the places that I saw as a child growing up in Kitui, for instance, which were places that were green and forested, if you go now, they are arid and not even able to sustain the trees and foliage which the bees depend on. So the creeping or the impact of climate change is a real threat. But also something which we really need to be aware of is the introduction of other bee species. You know the story of how what is known as the killer bees that have affected parts of the US. Somebody carried our own bees here, and because they thought our bees are extremely good workers, produce very good honey, and went with them to South America. And our bees are extremely aggressive. They outcompeted the bees they found there. And slowly, the new population started moving north and taking over the other population. So we need to be guarded about movement of genetic stock from other areas. Our bees are extremely hardworking. The quality of our honey is extremely good, and it's important that we also preserve that. So I think it's looking at the whole array and looking at the ecosystem, and then looking at the industries that our youth and our rural folk can take up, and looking at the opportunities of new products that can be used in healthcare, used in cosmetics, as well as used to generate new products, can come from our. Remember, the temperate countries do not have this excellent weather that we have. And so we should really look at that. But it is not only beekeeping. We need to look at also things like silkworm. In other words, looking at the products that come from our natural resources, the fauna, and so forth, and seeing how all this can contribute to the economy and introduce it also into the learning curriculum so that our youth appreciate what is the value of it.
Splendid. You actually speak very well passionately about mentorship and how you're a product of mentorship. And you've dealt with very many institutions and you've had instances of being in a position to really help institutions grow and developing the skills of young people and generally people in Africa. How do we get people to understand the importance of mentorship? And as we are speaking about opportunities, like in beekeeping, in silk, you see, my generation, I'm not very young. So your generation and my generation, really, we can understand the importance of bees and how we can engage in that ecosystem. By the younger people, how do we get them to understand the importance of these discussions we are having and mentor them to becoming really great people and giving them opportunities, as we are saying that young people need skills, they need to be encouraged and, be part of the system and the conversations that we're having.
Fiona, you've touched the core of the issue. Somebody, a colleague of mine whom I worked with at Isipe, Professor Mutuku Mutinga, once told me that Africa educates its youth through storytelling. And that is the value of mentorship. You remember very well, it's not too long ago, that we would go home to see our grandmother. Our grandmother would sit us down and tell us stories and so forth. And so we know what happened in the past, even better than from reading books, but hearing folklore and so forth. Thirdly, there has been an emphasis on supervision. Supervision is very different from mentorship. Supervision, the equivalent of what I can see or tell you, is nyapara, somebody who looks at others, supervises them as they do work. That's not mentorship. Mentorship is holding the hand of somebody who is probably younger than you, but not as experienced as you, and walking with them towards a certain goal. You know that we love watching the relay runs at the end of many athletic competitions. And one of the most interesting aspects that can illustrate what mentorship is about is when you look at one runner finishing the race and passing on the baton to the next. You will notice that as the first runner is coming to the end of the race, he or she begins to slow down. But the runner who is about to start also starts running. At that point, the baton has not passed on. It is the runner slows down, the other one picks up, and the baton is seamlessly passed on. That is mentorship. You take the skills that you have, the knowledge that you have, the experience that you have, and you pass on to the person that you're mentoring as they experience and work with you. So it's very different from supervision. The inspiration of mentorship comes actually from a verse in the Bible, Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens the face of his neighbor. Very powerful. So I think if we are to help the future generations, we need to cultivate a commitment to teaching and learning through mentorship experiences. So it should not be passed down as from a down approach. It should be given through hands-on experience, hands-on exposure, and guiding. And I think that is probably where the weakness is. We have relied too much on other forms of passing on knowledge and forgotten that the youth and the more inexperienced really need an exposure and an opportunity to work with them. In the sciences, for example, in your career to become a scientist or an academician, you will require to be exposed to writing scientific papers. And the person who is mentoring you should give you opportunities of practicing with you and helping you to see how best to improve yourself. So I think the whole mentorship is extremely important in all spheres of our life as we're passing on knowledge to younger generation. A lot of countries, advanced countries, are now progressively moving to experiences where mentorship is at the core of teaching and learning. And I think we should really look for those models in our teaching method. And probably you will start seeing the youth are more excited. They see real life examples. For example, what I've just described to you about my exposure with Pikatira. Without being mentored by him, I would not have been open to that. And as you know very well, one of my serious hobbies is beekeeping. I'm a serious honeybee enthusiast, and I commercialize and sell honey. But it's because of that exposure that I had with the late Professor Kikatira.
It's very true because I'm in the academia, and having been privileged to be doing my PhD in the UK, I am a product of very good mentorship. I have great supervisors. You actually see they want you to succeed. They involve you, they engage you in everything that they do, and they give you opportunities to thrive. and they hold your hands. I don't think I see that a lot in Africa. We have great opportunities, yes, we have, but I have not. I have gone to school in Kenya and in the UK, and the difference is quite huge. Mentorship is quite key, and we see actually these supervisors are keen on ensuring that you succeed, and they help you, they give you opportunities, and I hope and pray that in Kenya we'd actually have some similar, you know, kind of gestures from our seniors to really ensure that the younger people get the best out of what we have learned and our experiences.
That's true.
Yes. Now, you have a long career in research, in capacity building from your days in Isipe. How has the landscape of scientific research in Africa evolved over the past few decades?
Um, Quite fundamental. But linking what you're asking me with what I've just talked about. One of the fundamental ways to grow research is to have a positive research culture. And the research culture is a complicated collection of various forms of experiences. The one I've just explained to you of being exposed to listening to Professor Odhiambo giving a public lecture, an icon, speaking to young minds, a champion in his own right, leading us, me to change my career and change my focus. And there are many examples of that type. The late Professor Kalistas Juma, the late Nobel laureate Professor Wangari Maathai, and so forth, and so forth. I think we need to develop a model of growing young minds in a more systematic way. In the Western world, you will not become a senior scientist after finishing your postdoctoral training, after finishing your doctoral training, without having an exposure known as postdoctoral experience. Now, that is fairly alien. And in fact, our universities do not have such a position. It's very common in the Western world. You finish your PhD, you get a 2-year fellowship as a postdoc, and you go to a lab where there is a senior scientist, a research leader who mentors you, and so forth. I think those are the type of models we need to see. We, when working with the Professor Gilbert Kokwaro, developed such a model of funding research. We would be able to give a grant, which were in 3 parts. The research leader would write an application, and in that application, they would describe a research idea they want to pursue. But in part B, they would also tell us whom they want to train, either at master's or PhD, as part of that research grant. And in part C, they would also explain to us what is the infrastructure they would want to see improved, whether it is laboratory equipment, whether it is access to databases, or whatever it is, the infrastructure that would make them succeed. So a holistic capacity building or capacity strengthening model that grows the research leader, grows the young career researcher, but also helps you to acquire competence and infrastructure to develop your labs and work with partners and collaborations and so forth. So I think you need to look at the whole of that experience. Now, what has changed? When I started off as a young researcher in 1989, a lot of scientists were working in silos. Scientists would acquire a grant for themselves and then hire technicians or the working institutions, get technicians attached to them, get vehicles, and so forth. But it would be a one solo person affair. More recently, we are seeing more and more emphasis on working in teams, looking what is the value addition that team members bring on board. Even more importantly, we want to see teams in the South working with the teams in the north. And we don't want to see the teams in the south being used as spanner boys. We want them to have access to the grant for themselves to develop themselves, but for themselves also to go out and do the research. That is the only way that the experienced researchers in the north can hold our hand and lift us to another scale. So it is becoming more and more important to see the collaboration between South and North, but also between South and South. But even within that collaboration, there is more and more question about how are you responding to demand of the community. So a university such as Tomboya University or Masai Mara University will only continue to exist as long as they're able to respond to the needs of the community. I was fortunate, Fiona, when I was in the board of the Commission of University Education with Professor Henry Fairo to travel to the Netherlands and visit a university in the northern part of Netherlands. I can't quite remember the name. But the most interesting thing about that university is that it has relationship, especially the medical school. It has had a long relationship with the community, over 200 years long. And they have knowledge of the genetic constraints and problems of the community. So Fiona, increasingly, our researchers and our research institute are being held accountable to how they respond to the needs of the communities that they are located in. Masai Mara is a good example. To pick any other university, Mombasa, Technical University, or so forth, any of these universities which are set up in the country. Each of our countries have very peculiar issues, and the communities where they live, they have very peculiar issues. I was just talking to a gentleman who was telling me that of the varied needs of the people who live within the counties around Lake Victoria. And you know the issue of sickle cell anemia, which is common in that region, which is a very interesting disease because that if you are a sickler or you're a carrier of sickle cell, then you are resistant to malaria. And that is how it has come up with. So you would expect that Maseno University, Matinde Muliro University, Tomboya University, and all the others would be having an interest in researching on such issues and so forth. So it is important to ask questions or get the community to feel they own those institutions by bringing the questions that they have for development or also for their own well-being, for the university to work with them to get local solutions and so forth. And as I was saying, I was describing this university in northern Netherlands, which has this very unique relationship with the community. It knows the genetic makeup of the community and can even be able to focus whereby some genetic-based disorders are likely to come up and spread and what to do. So you really need that type of relationship. And maybe this now goes back to the core of the major problem in resource mobilization. If the community knows what your value is what in terms of addressing their needs, they will allocate money. They will find ways for us taxpayers to insist that your institution survive, and you will not have this issue such as we have been recently with our universities, such as the problems that have bedeviled Moi University and so forth. So I think that is an extremely important direction to go. But even more importantly, you are not going to isolate research from our well-being and from our development. The power of the youth expression that we saw last year in the Gen Z movement was basically saying you need to involve us in planning and thinking of our future. What does that mean? There is no spheres which you can isolate and say, this is for the elderly. They are the only people. There's only the professors who know. The youth have an important element in contributing. And if you want to use the power of the youth to develop, then work with them for them to help you identify their priorities, their research areas of interest, and help them also to see how they can be plugged in solving the developments of the country. And I think that is the difference. In the past, the agenda was very much driven from the funding north. So Wellcome Trust or UK government or USAID would give you funding and you do research because it goes to their interest. It is now becoming more and more important to listen to our own priorities and look for funding and help our researchers work on them. I mentioned to you some work I'm doing with the Desert Locust Control Organization of East Africa. Now, this is a colonial relic that was set up way back in the early 60s, even before Kenya got independent. Because as you know, there are certain countries in Africa which are breeding ground. In this, our region, Eastern Africa, the desert locust is a major problem, but it does not breed in all the countries. It breeds in specific countries like in Sudan, Eritrea, Yemen, and so forth. And then when they gregarize, then they move and become an innovation in the other country. And when that happens, now you need a concerted effort. And in 1960, then they set up the Desert Locust Control Organization, which was basically to look up the spread and invasion of the desert locust. There was a similar organization in West Africa, the African Migratory Locust, and then there was one in Southern Africa in Lusaka, known as the Red Locust Organization. So these three looked at that first in MLP. But more recently, our own countries, which are members of these organizations, have not been living to the spirit of providing resources. And just shortly, I think as we were getting to COVID, we had a major invasion of the desert locust. And yet the amount of money that our organizations had put into the organization was very, very little. And so that we had to go crying to FAO and the rest of the world and so forth. So I think we need to go back to an issue that you raised earlier about partnership and ensuring that the major transboundary problem, sassafras, locust, and other pests that are likely to come. Cypress aphid, I think you remember some time back, there was an invasion of cypress aphid, and all the wonderful cypress trees that we had were heavily at risk. And I do remember that particular time, the then Minister for Natural Resources and Environment cornered Professor Odero and said, look, you have this wonderful institution called the JPR. It is located in Kenya, yet you do not give a solution about a threat of cypress aphid. Now, Odero was put in a corner because the mandate of the pests that the JPR dealt with did not include forest pests. That was a different organization, KEFI, Kenya Forest Research Institute, and so forth. But suddenly the expertise was required of him and his team at ICIPE to work with the National Institute to come up with a plan to deal with the cypress aphid invasion. So those are the realities. Things are changing. It is now a global village, and we cannot work in silos. We need to work with teams and collaborate and build partnerships. I think that's the major change that has happened over time.
Splendid. Actually, we had a discussion in our previous episode where we spoke about the funding from USAID and other countries that has shrunk over the years. And now, actually, speaking about the desert locusts, FAO was actually instrumental in coordinating surveillance, and the USAID funding was suspended. So what happens when we have COVID coming, we have mpox, we have tsetse flies, and we have other instances of diseases and pests affecting Africa, yet we do not have perhaps a consolidated fund to deal with these issues? What happens to Africa now?
I think you just hit the issue on the head. Why does it have to be FAO? Why does it have to be USAID? The desert locust has been with us ever, biblical times. It's not the best of the US, not the best of the UK, and so forth. And yet you want a solution to come from there. I think what you're referring to is the observatory.
Yes.
That was being located in FAO and was meant to use emerging technologies to be able to focus where invasions and rebreeding of locusts and so forth. And just because that USAID funding was being availed, and now it's been cut off. That whole project is at a standstill. Yet it is an important tool for us not to use archaic methods of focusing, to use expensive ways of flying and surveying, while you have satellites and you have all this other data. You have mobile phones, which even people on the ground can tell you the behavior of the insects are changing. So it is our problem, and we should be looking for indigenous resources to build that capacity. I think we go back to what you said. Where's AU's leadership in this? Where's East African communities' leadership in this? It is these institutions that should be strategically thinking, but not waiting for FAO and other organizations. We should have our own point to put, especially after the experience of COVID. We had to depend on vaccines that have come from outside. Yet, this is a problem that Mpox is now here and other things are going to happen. We should build in that capability. And I'm happy to see that quite a number of countries are now upping their game in vaccine development. Kenya is one, and so forth. But that's the direction to go.
Well said. Speaking on the same issue about young people and postgrad and research, top scientists in Africa, you are actually leading the African Regional Postgraduate Program in insect science across multiple countries. I really want to know what's the difference between Kenya and other countries, and how is coordinating all these countries? What lessons have you learned, and what can we learn in Kenya from perhaps other countries that are doing it better than us?
Yes, that is actually a very interesting experience. Just to give you a bit of background to it, the APIS program is a program of ICIPE that was established by the late Professor Viambo after a deep reflection in the Rockefeller Center in Italy, where few experts gathered together. And they were looking at the capacity of universities to offer specialized training in critical areas. In the case of APIS, known as the African Regional Postgraduate Program in Insect Sciences, it was looking on how do you build capacity in what is bold, not just entomology, insect science. So you are looking at, yes, the entomology, but you're also looking at the statistics involved. You're looking at the demographic sciences. You're looking at forecasting and everything else that is related. And that's why the term insect science. And they decided that it is not going to be possible to build these capacities in universities. There were now centers that were coming up, such as ICIPE, which was basically an insect-related center. But it could not offer degrees. Degrees is the purview of universities. And so the arrangement was that why not get into relationship with our African universities? So yes, University of Nairobi or Kenyatta University, but University of Lagos and University of Ghana, and so forth and so forth across the whole continent, and put them in one forum whereby they can agree on a coursework they would provide. But ICIPE would then provide the project where they would be the host of where the project, whether it's on ticks, on sassaflies, or whatever it was, that was going to be done. So it was a partnership of that type. And this program has been extremely successful. It has built the capacity of so many people, women, as well as men, who have gone on to take a research leadership. I can just mention one who went on to become a vice chancellor. In fact, one currently now, Professor Minat is the professor, is the VC of the Technical University in Mombasa. If you go to Gulu, there was the VC was Professor Pen Moti, who was a luminary of that program. So there are people that have come up through that particular program who have moved in and are facing change, driving policy. Some of them have become ministers. Some of them have become PSs and so forth, all over the in front. So it was a change maker in the sense that you used networking to be able to build capacity. and rather than thinking that you can then just do it within the. Now, it has moved on. There's several examples there. In economics, there is an organization known as the African Economic Research Consortium, which is headquartered here in Nairobi, and I'm privileged to know its CEO, currently Professor Victor Murinde, who was in London School of Economics and saw us for quite a long time. That program also has followed that particular approach of working with universities and giving specialized assistance in areas of economic policy and so forth. But they're going even further now. They're now wanting to twin with universities in the North, in US, in Europe and elsewhere, in Japan and so forth, so that the experience is much more enriched. And I can tell you, donors are excited with those type of prospects because they can see that with $1, you are able to make a major impact, and that you're seeing people who are coming out of those programs who are motivated, are experienced, are recognized worldwide. So when they speak with the authority of the subject area and the experience. And I think those type of models, we need to experiment with more and more of this. Thank you.
Lovely. You are very big on research grants and fund management. Now, you have led 3 major research financing facilities since 2008, including the UK FCDO's Evidence Fund, DFID's East Africa Research Fund. What are the biggest challenges in securing and managing research funding in Africa?
You know, we must go back to the issue that I raised in the last episode when I asked the late Professor Odhiambo, Prof, how come you're so successful to mobilize resources to build institutions such as the CPE, to build institutions such as the African Academy of Sciences and so forth? And the answer was very simple. All you need is a good idea packaged in a good proposal, delivered as a convincing business plan to a funder who's willing to partner with you. That was the success of the AMPO, and I don't think it has changed up to now. My experience in the funding circles that you've mentioned is that when we mount a call for proposals or applications, requests for funding, something, and it's an open call, our researchers in the South, and especially in the African region, are always outcompeted by the University of Sussex groups, the London School of Economics groups, consultancy groups in America, in Australia, and elsewhere. And, you know, it beats the purpose. For example, we had a fund called East Africa Research Fund. It was essentially meant to be consumed within the East Africa region. Yet the people who won these grants majorly came from other parts of the world. And the question was, why was this happening? And it's just that our skills in writing proposals, building partnership, getting the right teams on the table were not competitive enough. And so resources are being put by these funders, and not only those ones, others as well, to try and build our competitive ability. We need to see our universities, our researchers being competitive to be as the best in the world, because those funds are merit-based. There is no way it is isolated only for research players within our region. Other regions need to also be able to contribute, but we need to be able to show our competitiveness. And one of our biggest competitiveness is that these research questions come from our area. So we know these areas. Our students are training here in Moi University, in Machakos University, and so forth, in Makerere, and across in Khartoum, in the University of Juba, you know, places that should actually have the solutions, and we should have the trained human resource that can respond to these issues. So why are we not writing? So there's very simple things that are happening. People are not following guidelines. People are just not getting to know why is it that the funder or the donor has decided to put a call of this type. Why don't you go back, read the strategic plan for that organization, that funding organization, or why understand the purpose, why that grant is. Because if you don't have their buy-in, you are not able to recognize why they're doing that, you will most likely miss the point. And that's what's been happening. So, for example, in a lot of UK funding, you will always see issues about poverty alleviation, not leaving anyone behind, inclusivity and making sure everybody is involved, and so forth. So if you're not able to describe that in your proposal, you are not likely to do. And I think we need to tell our institutions and bring them into workshops, work with them on hands-on experience to be able to build those skills. And that's a major, major worry.
Still on research funding, we have the UK government that has significantly invested in African research through programs like the Evidence Fund. Now, what is the impact of such funding on Africa's research ecosystem, and how can it be sustained despite shifting global priorities?
Yeah, you have to go to the selfish interest of the funder. When FCDO put out the call for Evidence Fund, there were certain things that the UK government wanted to see happen with the Evidence Fund across Africa, in Asia, and so forth. And there were priority areas that they wanted to see handled. So the research questions that they wanted answered mainly came from their interface with development projects in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, you name it. There was facing issues. For example, a very good example. In Tanzania, it became apparent that young boys were dropping out of secondary school education more than girls. And that's a very curious development. It was not so the case in Kenya. It was not so the case in Uganda. So why was it happening in Tanzania? And so a call was made in that regard. But the results that came out of that particular study, are helping to shape policy and shape direction, and even giving warnings, signals to Kenya and Uganda and other countries on what to do with the education system so that you have more retention. We had a call just last year on what is called inland blue economy. In Kenya here, we're blessed with so many lakes. And you drive from Nairobi going all the way down Rift Valley or going up to Kisumu, and you see all these inland lakes, and you ask, why? What are we doing with this? We have all these lakes. In fact, somebody joked the other day that, but we are unable to even compete in Olympics or Commonwealth boating competitions. Yet we have the water with us. So it is a matter of realignment and seeing what others have done. Look at the Baltic Sea and look at what transport is being used across those spaces. Look at the lakes in the Northern America, and then look at our lakes and see what can be done. So I think it's asking questions that are more central to our development. But even more important, remember, the UK programs are partners with our programs. They are not dictating their priorities. They need to be much more elaborate, engaging discussions between our countries and the donor countries to shape directions of funding. It is important. Funders don't have all the answers. You may be able to persuade them to give you a funding stream because your priority is more important, or you can be able to convince in that direction. And so we keep on saying, continue lobby, continue discussions, and so forth. And you just saw what has just happened just this week with Trump's direction on tariffs. And suddenly Kenya and other countries have been hit because of the experience of AGOA. But I remember reading an article in the newspaper which was extremely impressive in the sense that it didn't see it as gloom. It just told Kenyans, here's your opportunity.
Yes.
Think again. How can you work with Americans different Trump is giving an opportunity to engage, to suggest ways to be able to have a better trade relationship. Don't cry about the spilled water. That is not going to come. Change and discuss and suggest, come up with new plans. And I think that is the way we should be aggressively moving in this new reality of disruptive age and global engagement.
Yes, actually, speaking about realignment and how Kenya can look at this as an opportunity, during Kibaki's era, we saw meritocracy being, part and parcel of what was happening in the public service. I'm not so sure that happens anymore. So how do we encourage, a culture of meritocracy? Because Kenya for a long time has been known to really have excellent professionals, excellent scientists, but how do we ensure that these people actually are heard? We have people who are in the policy space that can speak sense to the power, and the power listens.
That's an interesting question. And I'm really interested to see what people say about that. The reality from a funding world, funders are giving you grants based from allocation of their taxpayers. So UK taxpayers are not going to give you money for corrupt practices or to be used in instances where you are not accountable. If that is discovered, that funding goes, and it goes forever. And I think this is what you are seeing. I'm not an authority on exactly why Trump decided to go in the direction of USAID, but already you can see pointers where there was mismanagement, no accountability. Suddenly, the organization had become more important than the reason for its existence. So, and I think that is the accountability. But for us to then stay engaged, even without donor funding, people are asking that people who have been involved in malpractices face the full face of the law. That is the way it is played everywhere in the world. You can see even these days, it doesn't matter whether you're a retired professor at 90. If there's a paper that is published in the 1940s and there's a trace of plagiarism, your professorship will be stripped.
Very true.
So a lot of people have been very senior people whom we thought had actually done very well, have been discovered with malpractices, scientific fraud, and so forth. We will go back. They will go back to institutions. Doesn't matter. I got my degree from University of Auckland in 1989. It can be stripped. And we've seen instances of that. And that is what the world demands. So we are going to force those who want to live a second order. We will just account and make you. And this is what the Gen Z told you. You don't seem to get it. Because that is what the world accounts for. And I am a Christian. And Jesus Christ told us so. So we will go that direction.
Very well said. Actually, we need to pay for the sins of what we have done. If we really do not ensure that corruption is kicked out of the door in Africa, we have a long way to go. Now, let's speak about research evidence to inform policy. For the longest time I've known you, you are a strong advocate for research evidence to inform policy. How can African researchers make their work more policy relevant and attract international funding?
It's asking smart questions. There's this big debate within universities that there is academic freedom and that we will do research because research will inform knowledge. How it is used and adapted, that's a different issue. I think we need to strike a balance in the two. The reality of it, you cannot do research for the sake of research if it doesn't show some direction. And the reason behind it is that there is a dollar or a shilling element. There is a cost element. And nobody wants to be speculative anymore about the future. So, whatever type of research you're doing, however esoteric, it doesn't matter. At some point, it needs to show us into a direction. A lot of the technologies that we are now currently using, including mobile phones and so forth, including the internet, this came out from other sources in the military. For example, the internet was a communication arrangement within the military, and later on got a worldwide appeal and has sorted out a lot of our communication issues. So we need to look at issues in that way. The innovation in M-Pesa is a good example. A few years back, we just sending money to rural Kenya was just a headache. I remember sending money up country. You'd go to a camper bus, buy a book, then get a carbon paper. Somebody told us to wrap money in carbon paper and you put it in the book, then put it in an envelope and put sellotape. Nobody will detect it's money. Whether it was true or not. But anyway, M-Pesa sorted all that. Yeah. So I think we now need to show relevance in that research and be able to skillfully show that there will be immediate returns. In fact, from the funding organizations that I'm working with, we no longer wait for you to give me the final outcome of the research work you do. We want you, as you develop your work plan, to show me outcomes and outputs that feed to the real world. So if I'm doing something to do with a development project that will catch the attention of East Africa, I would want that every so often an output goes to inform a Council of Ministers meeting at the EAC, which will form the heads of state, not the final report. So that is the demand, that we need to see more alignment with policy making organs. So decisions are going, research work informing parliament decisions, and so forth and so forth. And I think that is the direction that we need to be able to show that this piece of research was just not esoteric. It had some relevance. And I think that way you will be able to attract more funding. But not only so, you will produce research workers that are more attuned to addressing the problem of society and of our national economies.
Quite relevant information that is quite important for the audiences. You are very versatile, and of course, you've worked a lot in science, technology, innovation, and development. How do we ensure that African governments integrate this into their national development plans?
I think that is happening more increasingly. And maybe let's look at the example of Kenya. Kenya had what was known as the National Council for Science, NCST, Science and Technology, for a long time. Things started way back late 60s and moved out until when it was now converted to National Council for Science, Technology and Innovation. In other words, there was a certain realization that ST, science and technology alone, or research and development alone, without impact on innovation, cannot make a change. And now in Kenya, in 2012, there was a radical shift, policy change, forming three key organizations: NACOSTI, the National Commission for Science and Technology and Innovation, NACOSTI, forming the National Research Fund, NRF, and then forming the Kenya Innovation Agency, Kenya. So that was a strategic move by Kenya to place this organization within the policy framework. But they went further and ensured that in their operations, these organizations talk to each other. So, for example, in the boards of this organization, the CEOs sit in each other's boards, just to make sure that the debate is being moved coherently. But at the same time, there was an understanding that the regulatory mechanism for universities needed to be changed, especially the oversight. And so we changed from the Commission for Higher Education to Commission of University Education. And for the first time, we started to have boards that were board members that were elected by merit. And that's how I myself, who had never worked in a university, ended up sitting at the Commission of University Education under the chairmanship of Professor Henry Thairo. So that is the direction that we are seeing it happening more and more, and it is the model that we saw happening in Brazil, it's the model that is happening in India, it's a model that is happening in the rest of the world. And more importantly, in a country like Kenya, we started seeing a request for a complementary funding agency. Okay, normally the funding of research was within the National Council for Science and Technology or in the Commission for Higher Education. But now the question funders was asking, we want to collaborate with a national funding agency. And for the first time, NRF, after the establishment of NRF, we started having UK institutions such as the Newton Fund collaborating with the NRF of Kenya and NRF of South Africa to be able to mobilize resources, but also to stimulate research and development through science, technology, and innovation. And if we are to move this debate further, you know very well AI is now here with us. And the global discussion is how do we use the energy unleashed by AI to reform the education system, but also to reform the research and development STI ecosystem. So you will be seeing much more. And Kenya has just published an AI oversight policy in that direction. So you will be seeing much more ways of being efficiently to be able to track, do work in these areas whereby you use AI responsibly, ethically, and so forth. So I think, and it's happening in AU, it's happening in our major regional organizations and so forth. So I think that's the direction that we're going.
Very well said. Now, let's talk about communication. You have successfully lobbied for research funding to be used in policy making. What are the best ways researchers can communicate complex scientific findings to policymakers and the public?
You know, the owner of the game, where there's a football match, are the players who are playing it. The owner of the research work that has been undertaken is the researcher, the PI, principal investigator, or the institution itself, if it's a research institution. They have the responsibility to disseminate the research results. There's always been this thing that people say that researchers are not trained as good communicators. But our pushback is that nothing stops you to collaborate with communicators to effectively communicate the output of your research. Because without that dissemination and without that demonstration of the impact of your research work, you are not going to be able to attract further resources. So it doesn't matter what work you did. At some point, you need to be able to tell me, has this work informed policy? Has the output been adopted? Are there people developing other issues as a result of that? And so forth and so forth. Because development is integrated. And so we're not talking about just the hard sciences or the natural sciences. We're talking about even the social sciences. So the funding that is available is looking globally and holistically at the societal development process. And it has a social angle, it has a skills angle, it has a disciplinary angle, and so forth and so forth. But all this needs to be effectively communicated. So in a lot of grants that you now see, there is an aspect of dissemination and communication. Exactly what are you going to do? And it has even gone further. It is not, we're not only interested in the research paper. We're not interested in the report. We're not even interested in the slides. We want to see an animation that can be put in a phone, whereby youth traveling from Kayole going to town, as they are traveling, can see a 2-minute clip of the impact of some work that was done at Strathmore University. More and more of that innovation, creative communication, engaging communication. Communication can't be boring. Somebody gave me an example of walking into a hospital waiting for a procedure. And they were watching TV, and the only thing that was on TV was the interview of the IBC commissioners. Surely you have a captive audience who need to know about kidney health, about chest health, about the risk of pneumonia that we're facing now. Why don't you talk to them about that? Go to Mata Hospital, go to Kenyatta Hospital. They are going nowhere. Use this opportunity to communicate with them. The IBC, they can look at it when they go home. So I think we need to think about and then creatively be able to broadcast, communicate, give blitz, our ringtones, and so forth. Why is it that as we are doing our core chores, we're washing clothes, somebody's preparing the garden, instead of just listening to the music from their phones, they are not listening to interesting clips of people discussing issues to do with sickle cell anemia, and why the young kids should not think that this is a death sentence. We need to speak in the language of the community. At the moment, we are speaking down to them.
Very well said. Of course, you're also a playwright, you do storytelling and blogging, and all this really has contributed immensely to you to tell us the story of what you've done, and contributing to people understanding what international development is all about, what science technology is all about. Thank you very much. Now, as we conclude, you have worked at the intersection of science, policy, and governance. What advice will you give young African professionals looking to follow a similar career trajectory?
Be focused, know where you want to go, and be able to identify champions and mentors that can lead you along the way. It's very flattering. Every time I get a phone call or an email for a young person saying, I want you to mentor me, my first question is, why me? And the next one is, why not you? But that's what it is. We feel flattered that even for you to invite me for this interview, I'm flattered because I don't think I'm any different from anybody else. But suddenly you've made me feel that I have a message that I need to use your medium to convey to others. So I think that's what it is. Look at the young JPR sitting at the National Museums of Kenya, wondering what is the future and what would he like to be. And ask me that question now, and I say, I've had a very fulfilled life. I've been blessed with friends. I've had excellent mentors. I've been exposed. I've traveled across the world. I've met world leaders such as the late Mobutu Sese Seko. I've met Mugabe and other people. I've talked to Nyerere. I met Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. I have been fortunate. But it is because I decided to position myself in the path of where they were. Or my mentors also used opportunities to make sure that I get there. So I think the power of choosing the right mentor, not being an obstacle or a disruption to the life of the mentor. The mentor also wants to grow, but the mentor also feels privileged to be able to mentor others. Find a balancing the working efforts. Give suggestions. Don't be shy. And where you can see something does not work, accept and move on. And more recently, Fiona, I've been talking to you that I noticed that our youth do not have an inherent capacity to bounce back. So you fail in exams and your life is shattered. Your girlfriend leaves you and you want to commit suicide, and so forth and so forth. How do we build resilience in our youth to bounce back? Because obstacles will happen. Mothers and fathers will die. Wives will die. Girlfriends will go. Boyfriends will disappear. Institutions will collapse. The whole things will happen. COVID will happen. So how do you find a position for yourself? Go and find your true north and follow that star. It will lead you to a destination of fulfillment and a destination you would like to arrive at. I don't know what it is, but it is there out for you. Find it.
Thank you very much, Dr. JPR Odero, a well-seasoned scientist in Africa and in the world. He has worked with global leaders. He has been privileged to meet Mobutu Sese Seko, Zimbabwean leader, Mugabe, and the rest of these great African nationalists. And he has really learned a lot. And what we've learned today is that meritocracy is actually the way to go for Africa. We need to think about how to curb corruption in this country and also in Africa generally, and to ensure that you really have top people advising these governments, and also for governments to really listen to their very best minds and ensure that our countries grow and we have something to show for the betterment of our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Until next time, goodbye.